All right. Shall we? So I wanted just to clarify with you first before we started that there's a necessity for definitions, right? So basically what we have to do is we have to agree basically on like basic certain definitions of words and terms in order to have a fruitful conversation. So the beginning of wisdom is to call things by their proper name. And therefore we must define our terms. So we have to define terms like what we mean by moral relativism before we can debate it. So can you provide me with your definition of moral relativism, and then I'll do the same so that we can kind of be on the same page, and then I can start, because without defining the terms at the beginning, it almost feels like we're gonna run into some problems unless we agree on it.
The other thing is that there's this general occult idea that um, that we are becoming gods or we're already gods. So some of us are further along in that process. I think some people are practically like NPCs and aren't far along that process at all. Um, but basically, we're all communicating energetically to make this, to make what we um, view as morality, sort of the reality. We're actually creating the reality of what we see around us. So, in a way, we're all gods um, that are sort of uh, defining the rules of the game we play.
Okay. So can I offer you a different kind of sort of definition of moral relativism? So, moral relativism is, in my perspective, the philosophical view that moral judgments are not absolute or universal, but rather relative to cultural, social, or individual standards. It suggests that no single objective standard exists to judge one's culture morally as superior to another's, holding that right and wrong vary based on context. Would you agree on that? Because that's like basically what a simplified understanding of what moral relativism is. If we can agree to that, then we're off to the races, basically. Well, for example, you made the argument earlier that God determines moral attributes, right? And which is kind of the Socratic argument, in the sense that when he was arguing about, well, is something good because God thinks that it's good, or is it God independently good of God? So then that brings us back to the other question of, so if moral relativism is true, that means that each culture has a different God, and that each culture within that specific context, that moral context and ethical framework, that those actions are okay within that given framework because their God says that it's right. So in a sense, it almost takes away the idea of one God, because it has multiple gods, essentially, right? Like each civilization has its own God and its own moral code, and then they're all different and morally exclusive. So therefore, if I do something wrong here in North America, if I go to another country and they have a different God, then I do something that's immoral there, then it's not immoral because they say it's okay. So it's basically saying that morality is culturally dependent, because God is also a social construct to a degree, obviously, that the societies that create gods, they often look just like the societies that they are. So it's like just random, you know what I mean? That every god almost exactly is a cookie cutter image of the people that made them. That's good enough. That's good enough. There's always going to be some disagreement. That's good enough. As long as we're good with that, then I don't really need to argue about it, because sometimes people like to make different arguments about it, but as long as we're working off the same chart. So would you like me to start now? Can I provide my intro? Okay, shall we begin the formal debate? So I've the opening I will refer to as the autopsy of the transcendental will. Honorable chair, which would be us, worthy opposition, ladies and gentlemen, we convene to adjudicate a conflict between two irreconcilable architectures, the archaic desire for universal morality, often cloaked in the faux sophistication of moral relativism, and the cold systemic reality of the post-Darwinian landscape we find ourselves inhabiting in the postmodern age. Secondly, we are also here to perform a final rite for a fragmented ideological landscape. We bid farewell to the circus of relativism, a project that promised total liberation, yet delivered only intellectual and moral bankruptcy of the highest order. My opposition will likely invite you into a new aeon, positing that morality is a bespoke pursuit of the so-called true will. If that be the case, we must apply a Socratic scalpel to this premise. If we accept the Darwinian revolution as the end of human exceptionalism, recognizing our species not as imago Dei or image of God, but as biological iterations emergent from the primeval slime, then the true self is revealed as a lingering ghost of Jerusalem. It is merely a Christian soul renamed, a metaphysical stowaway hiding in the vocabulary of individualism. There you go. Now back to you.
Like the gods make the rules of physics and reality and myth, I assert that all moral laws are also the product of the will of the gods. Furthermore, since we are the gods on earth, humans are God and Christless, we are actually creating morality through our will and conversation with all living beings, with all other beings. So the idea here is that we are all divine, at least in part. And so we are all making the rules of the game together. So, perhaps there is a highest God, an aeon, but we are all, for the most part, the rules of the game we are making ourselves, or, somewhat higher beings. But some of us are higher beings here already, like avatars or demigods. And particularly by gods, to define gods, Plato says that gods are planets. Whether one has an archetypal view or a deity view of what the gods are. For the purposes of this talk, I'm assuming there exist entities, there are matrix intelligences that basically moderate our world. And I say matrix because the intelligences are multidimensional and many-layered, so one's experience of a god can be varied. So the reason I say matrix is not to refer to like the film The Matrix or like Gnosticism, but the fact that, or this idea that it's more like math, where there's like a matrix has like different parts that are calculating different things. Like I think computers use that a lot. That's the idea behind, the gods are matrices. That's why matrices. That's why I'm describing them that way, because they're kind of calculating many different things at once. There's many different sides to them. Like, you have Durga, but you also have Kali, but you also have, Parvati. And people will interact with even, a very specific being within, sort of many beings that are similar, and even the same name, people will have different experiences and such. So there's a lot of different dimensions to these things. Also, I wanted to define will. Will is the proto-thought formed on the spiritual plane that guides one's spirit. It is one's higher self or holy guardian angel, HGA, pushing its will as a proto-thought that one experiences as that which is higher in the self. So will, or true will, is a movement of the higher self or HGA, and not referring to the willpower or temporary desires of an individual. Yeah, true will. Yeah. Yeah, I suppose it is good to delineate or to differentiate true will from just simply will. In this case, does come from Crowley, from the Book of the Law. So yeah, just to recap. So there's gods, God and gods, just things higher than us that make some of the rules, and then but a lot of the rules we're making ourselves because the gods aren't that concerned about every little thing. Or rather, it's so just to recap, the gods make some rules, we make a lot of rules, and we make these rules with our will. So we don't necessarily make it consciously. We don't, it's not me thinking here doesn't recreate reality. It's something higher in us that we can sort of experience through, various mystical practices. But like what you're inspired to do, um, who do you pick to love, kind of thing. That's where you can see true will, because you can think something constantly, but it's not necessarily going to have an effect. Yeah, thoughts turn into things, but I'm saying there's something actually higher that like you can use thoughts to brute force this, but this thing is like higher mind.
You're referring to the true will, right? You're referring to Crowley's true will concept, right? Okay. Yeah. No, it has to be called true will. It has to be called true will because otherwise you can't, you have to delineate it from, for example, Nietzsche's will to power. It's completely different. That's what I'm going to talk about. I was actually hoping that you would make that argument and I was actually counting on it. Um, I have a response to you that I feel that actually does justice to the system that you're using, but I'm also going to use it in a way that you didn't expect because you probably would have expected me to pull out Plato or use some type of Abrahamic argument for universal morality. But instead, I opted for a completely different attack strategy. And this strategy is actually using Crowley's system against him. So I don't know if you're aware of this, but in Crowley's own moral system, he identifies Friedrich Nietzsche as a type of prophet within his own religious structure. And this is where it becomes interesting. Because as Nietzsche, whom the architect of my opponent's system, Aleister Crowley, actually defined as the avatar of Thoth. So Aleister Crowley, he was not a contemporary of Friedrich Nietzsche because Friedrich Nietzsche lived in the 1800s and a little bit earlier, and then Crowley was born near the end of the 1800s. So he had already published a lot of his works before Crowley had been born. And basically, Hegel was, although people usually like to credit Nietzsche with the phrase "God is dead and we have killed him," that phrase was actually pioneered by Hegel, but it was done so under different circumstances. So it was essentially not actually said by Nietzsche, although he's like very famous for that phrase. Not only that, but Nietzsche also published books that I've read called The Gay Science, Beyond Good and Evil, and another one literally called The Antichrist. So before Crowley slithered his way onto the scene unceremoniously, the mantle of, shall we say, the Antichrist had already been adopted by a far superior writer, Nietzsche, who called himself the Antichrist. But he did so not in an Abrahamic sense, but in an anti-Abrahamic sense. So he was not endorsing Satan or Crowley. He was actually endorsing a return to a Homeric hero, the return to a pre-Socratic morality, a morality that is the master morality and not the morality of the herd, because we have to delineate because you were expecting me to come with some Platonic stuff, but which is kind of what I'm doing, but I'm coming at it from a completely different angle. Because Crowley himself identified Nietzsche as the avatar of Thoth, as the messenger. And you mentioned avatars already, so you set me up perfectly for this. That he basically, Crowley, who is the person, the architect of your moral system, identified Nietzsche as a superior force. But the thing is, Nietzsche correctly observed that the self is a fiction. To claim true will is to deny the very prophet you claim to follow. It is an attempt to claim the jester's privilege of freedom without the philosopher's shadow of responsibility. Now, I'll have to pull from my cyberpunk metaphysics philosophy framework and say our inquiry must move beyond the mismatch of hermetic aesthetics, or shall I say post-hermetic aesthetics, such as Crowleyan thelema. As Gregory Bateson noted, morality is a systemic ecology of information. If that ecology is populated by backworld myths and quantum delusions, the system inevitably collapses into seismogenesis, a total break from reality. Nietzsche contends there is no universal morality to find and no relative will to invent. There is only the will to power and the patterns which connects it. Tonight, we do not debate the right way to live. We perform an autopsy, on the other hand, on the delusions that prevent us from seeing what we have already become. To follow Socrates is to submit to the unyielding fire of inquiry that burns away the dross of ego until only the structural truth remains. To follow Nietzsche is to have the courage to inhabit that post-Darwinian void without the security blanket of occult rituals. These men represent the Athens of the mind, the cross-disciplinary pursuit of excellence and the demand of evolution. Contrast this with with the scourge of moral relativism. Relativism is not a philosophy. It's actually an intellectual surrender. I would place moral relativism into the herd mentality, not into the master morality. It is the herd pretending that their lack of direction is actually freedom. By claiming do what thou wilt, the Crowleyan does not become an Ubermensch. He does not become a Superman. They become a slave to an unexamined biological impulse, dressed up in the sophistication of Gnostic saints. If Crowley is a prophet, he is a prophet of entropy. He will follow the avatar of Thoth and the logic of Socrates. But if we are to follow the avatar of Thoth, who Crowley identified as Nietzsche, and the logic of Socrates, who in my mind represents the Logos, we seek a universal morality of power and reason, a code that doesn't hide from science, but uses it as a thermometer to take the temperature of the world. The unified field theory of the void is basically what I'm describing through the Nietzschean principles. We choose the universal because it is the only path that demands we transcend our pond scum origins of Darwinianness. We choose the absolute over the relative because in the necropolis of pure reason, only the structurally sound survives. My opponent offers you a new aeon of smoke and mirrors, but I offer you the cold, hard clarity of dialectical singularity. We do not do what thou wilt, we become what we are. We are the architects of our own abyss. Your turn. I have a rebuttal cheat sheet if you'd like to start. I could start if you want. I literally have also I would like to hear what you have to say to some of the points that I brought up. But I have no problem moving. If we want to move directly into the rebuttal stage, I can go first or you can go first, however you desire.
Yeah, let's get into rebuttals. So first of all, I didn't know that about Nietzsche. I don't. It doesn't surprise me that he said something like that about that Crowley said something like that about Nietzsche. It's interesting for sure. I don't think it's so critical that Nietzsche and Crowley agree on everything. Crowley was more sort of like poetic about things, and I think in some metaphorical way he could make the case that, or he could say that Nietzsche is an avatar of Thoth or something without having to be so direct. Also, Crowley changed his mind a lot to experiment with different things, so I'm not sure if he held that. It's not necessarily that he held that view his entire life, although maybe he did. But I think these things are a lot more obtuse than that, and I think if Crowley was saying this about Nietzsche and went somewhere else with it, took inspiration from it, I could see that. Um, but Crowley was pretty much to the point of um, just taking an idea and
So you're basically saying that a lot of his ideas that I identified are things that he abandoned later in life, is what you're saying?
not necessarily that, but yeah, he did go on, to abandon a lot of the things he believed in the past. Um, but that's something I actually find compelling about Crowley is that he was willing to experiment with different ideas and take things and turn them a different way and look at them. I think that's really compelling for someone who's in secret societies, in the handling magic, handling these ideas, these topics. Also, I think when someone like
But you can agree that that Crowley identified Nietzsche as a prophet within his moral system and his spiritual framework. That is a fact.
yeah, I mean, I think too the fact that he recognized that Nietzsche, is like an avatar, or is at least acting as an avatar of both, and then um, he then took it a different direction. Um, you know, all of these different philosophies, they come from somewhere. They're inspired. I think everyone in the world is to some extent like an avatar. Like a lot of people in the world are an avatar of one being or another. Um, so
He said Nietzsche is literally a prophet of my Thelemic religion, and that he basically was speaking the same. Crowley tried to claim that he was singing from the same song sheet as Nietzsche, and that Nietzsche was the one before him, essentially. And so, which makes total sense to me, basically, because they both have this, except that Crowley was like very spiritual, whereas Nietzsche was like, no, 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 Christianity is dead, and we have to come to terms with it, right? And that's completely different than what Crowley says. Crowley's like, ooh, mysticism and rituals and everything. So I would say Crowley actually, what he represents is Crowley is not personally a herd mentality person. I believe Crowley is what Nietzsche refers to as the master morality, can be split into multiple components. So the two components that I would say that actually represent you and me are interesting. Nietzsche represents the Homeric hero, which I represent, and then the priest, which you represent. So Crowley was definitely not a Homeric hero. He was a priest. He was of the priestly class. And so the priest and the warrior are both archetypes of the master morality, although they do different things, right? The priest constructs their own morality and uses guilt complexes and other things and metaphysics and ritual to subject the other people to their will. Whereas the hero is amoral in a sense. He does what he wants because he has might, and he's like a Callias kind of sophist in a sense, like an anti-Platonic. Like even though I would say Nietzsche is actually more of a poet than he is a philosopher, but he took aim at Plato and Socrates because he believed that he wanted to return to a time before the philosophers, because he believed that the appearance of the philosophers actually described the fall of Greece instead of the rise. So it was basically the Socrates' arrival signaled the end of the Greek golden era, because it showed that basically that morality no longer that morality was being questioned because the Greeks had already lost it by the time Socrates showed up. Anyway, so I wanted to ask you a oh, sorry, what were you going to say? Oh, I was going to ask you a question. Oh, yeah, yeah.
yeah, I was just going to say that the Hindu stuff, like in the Puranas, it talks about how a lot of new philosophies come about as the age degrades, as the Kali Yuga gets worse and worse. So it's funny the Greeks say something similar. Um, like more avatars come down to try and help fix things and whatnot.
Apparently Jeffrey Epstein was a big Crowley reader as well. He had all of his books and stuff. If you look at the files, you'll see that Epstein had all of Crowley's books displayed around his house, his various houses. So you're right. You're right. At a high level, you're absolutely right. At a high level, the university people, the professors, the PhDs, a lot of these people are closeted Crowley supporters. I 100% agree with you, and they will deny it and deny it and deny and deny. But the reality is that these people are heavily influenced by him, whether they want to accept it or not. And that's what I was telling you. Is that the same thing about Aleister Crowley? Aleister Crowley is deeply influenced by Friedrich Nietzsche, whether he wants to admit it or not. And he had no choice but to admit that Friedrich Nietzsche is above him, was before him and above him in terms of his beliefs and his capacity. And I personally believe that Crowley was an extremely smart guy, but and he was a master morality guy. I believe that. Why do I say that? Because he invented the book of laws that he subjected everyone else to. So he is the master, and everyone else that follows him is the follower, is the herd. So the Thelemites are the herd. Crowley is the master. Like big fans, like big fans, like big fans, like big fans. Like recreate his rituals, like read all his books. Like he's basically Epstein was basically Aleister Crowley is basically Taylor Swift to Epstein. He loves him. Because it's low level, bro. It's low level. That's why it's accessible. It's low level stuff. That's why I think personally, I think Aleister Crowley hated Nietzsche and he hated W.B. Yeats because they were Nobel Prize winning genius level intellects who were capable of translating their genius into paper. So I think Crowley was a genius, an evil genius. I'll give him his dues. He was master morality. He was a genius. He was also extremely evil. But the thing that pissed him off the most was that he did not have the writing chops that W.B. Yeats did, that the Hermetics did, that Nietzsche had. He was just inferior in his philosophy. He was superior to other people. But in his writing abilities, unfortunately, writing is just one of those things, you know? You're just not made for it. You just this is not he's just not that guy, pal. You know, so it's like no matter what Aleister Crowley did, he could never write better than Nietzsche or W.B. Yeats. And it wasn't that his ideas were necessarily inferior, it's that his writing capacity was inferior. So we have to delineate between someone's intellectual capacity and their writing capacity, right? So someone can be way smarter than me, but I write better than them, right? Or maybe I'm smarter than them, but they write so much better than me that my ideas don't become translated. So it might be a lost in translation kind of thing, where essentially it's like may the best writer win.
I also want to say that um, as far as writing, I don't, you know, I read some of his poems and I read like Magic Without Tears. I haven't read everything Crowley wrote. Read like Magic Without Tears, Book of the Law, a few poems and such. Um, I like his stuff. It's more direct. It's more it's like cookies on the bottom shelf.
It's not Shakespeare, I'll tell you that. It's not Shakespeare. I'll put that to you. It's more like grade 12 English. Just letting you know personally after having read this stuff.
Yeah, I also think that you know, he didn't have he didn't get a Nobel Prize for. I don't think he would have had chances to get a Nobel Prize for his writing anyways, because basically he was running from country to country because of his lifestyle and whatnot. He sort of used the wickedest man on earth uh, sort of moniker to get people excited about him and such and cause a stir. He liked that.
Yeah. No, no, he's not dumb. No, 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 no. He's not dumb. He's not dumb. No, no, you're missing my point. Crowley is a priest. He's a masterful priest, right? He has the master morality. The people who follow him are the herd. That's my point.
Yeah, no, I would say that's not the case. The OTO has so many differences within it. There's always groups fractioning off and whatnot. People within have all kinds of different ideas, have all kinds of different backgrounds.
Well, there's an Overton win. There's a thalamic Overton window, And the thalamic Overton window, as I've witnessed, basically means that you're allowed a certain amount of deviation from the norm within them, but you're always operating within the framework of acceptable opinions. And that works for society as well as academia, as well as any religion or organization, that there's an Overton window where all of the acceptable opinions appear within this window, and you can have so much variation within the window of Overton window of acceptable opinions, but there's lots of opinions that are outside of the acceptable opinion Overton window, and those opinions are not ever touched because the second you do, you're excluded from the group. So yes, I agree with you. There is a lot of like arguments between the OTO. They're not Catholic in that sense. They have like a very they're not like a top down. They're more decentralized. I would agree, right? But even within this occult decentralized network, they are still subject to Crowley's top down control. He is the master. You are his herd. That is what it is, and I don't want people to I think people don't understand this, that yes, okay, fine, you want to say religion is a control matrix, you want to say all these things, that also applies to the people fighting against religion who want to subject you to their system. I have a question for you based on what you just said. And I'm just letting you know it's going to be a difficult one, so prepare yourself for this line of questioning. If Crowley's true will is truly individual, why must it be discovered through 19th century Hermetic symbols and rituals? Are you finding yourself or just learning a more exotic dialect of the herd?
Okay, so what we're talking about is some, esoteric inside baseball, basically. So I would say it's hard to get to that. It's hard to find your true will, what you truly want, what you truly desire, what your true inspiration is from a higher level of consciousness. Um, there's the Abramelin process. There's Liber Samic, which Crowley made that, and like I did it through Tantra. So I know of three different ways, and I think some people use, they do astral projection and some stuff, and apparently then because what you're trying to do is you're trying to cross the abyss. You cross the abyss of like I don't know, ignorance or something. I've experienced it. I didn't completely understand it, but you cross the abyss, and then you meet your holy guardian angel, so to speak. You just have an awareness of your higher consciousness, in my opinion. There's different opinions on this, but the experience is kind of similar. Basically, these are just different processes to perhaps break through some level of filtration in the self or something. Because I some people do the Abramelin process, and they invoke 4 archdemons over time to come bother them, and if they survive that, then they can move forward and cross the abyss. Or Liber Samic, you're supposed to invoke a lot of miasma, and then according to Doth Darling, that makes your HGA come and basically come to your rescue. I don't know. I didn't do that. I did Tantra, which was also quite difficult and dangerous. Yeah, yeah. So basically it's I think they're just different processes. It's not like, okay, you have to do this to know your true will. It's not like a cult, right? It's just they're different processes that get you to know your true will then. And once you know your true will, it just becomes easier. There's some other things that are like really crazy and detailed. Like some people use astrology to find out the name of their holy guardian angel, or like some numerology stuff to find out their true transcendental name that falls between lifetimes. I'm not really interested in that sort of thing. I think suffice to say that everyone has some interaction.
That's not me. I don't follow any of that stuff. I'm strictly philosophy. I like mostly exist, I think like in the realm of ideas.
So the thing is here that Crowley traveled to the East, and he traveled to the East and he learned Buddhism. And so he did all these meditations, and or he learned all kinds of meditation and various tantric practices. Um, and then he came back and he realized that, oh my god, all of these secret society things are um, just tantra basically. And so that's why he wasn't impressed when he got through it, because it wasn't mysterious to him anymore, because when, like, I've done this and Damien Eccles has done this, and this is what Crowley did, is started in the East and came to the West, and it's a much more comprehensive sort of foundation of magic.